Good morning. Welcome to Phase 2 Careers program about effective interviewing prep. And we've got a great panel today and got a lot to cover. 5 panelists. I have it organized in such that basically we'll have different parts of the interview that we'll discuss. We'll talk about the prep first, what to expect in the interview, typical questions, types of interviews, and follow-up. And we've got a great panel. I have Jeff Gallipo, Barbara Goff, John Hohulin, Michelle Mendoza, and finally Gordon Wu, and I'm Ron Visconti. Jeff, do you want to, before we get started, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel with everyone. My background is I started out in the world of retail and worked in retail for many years for a company that doesn't exist anymore, Borders. I don't know how many of you may have fond memories of Borders bookstores, but and after Borders closed, I transitioned into the nonprofit sector. I've worked for a large nonprofit, which was Goodwill, which was a very, very interesting experience, and then moved from there into a capacity building nonprofit that helped nonprofits all over the state of California. And so I got to look under a lot of different hoods. And after that experience, I moved into the role I'm in now at LifeMoves, where I am the talent acquisition manager, which means I basically do a lot of our interviewing, our benchmarking for pay and compensation, write a lot of our job descriptions and postings, and really work with all of the managers throughout the organization to assess their needs for talent.
Great. It's great to have you on the panel, and we've had you on several other programs. You're a great resource to Phase 2 Careers. Barbara, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was a journalism major, and I started in technology. I wrote for a tech magazine, and then I moved into advertising, which I found out I preferred, and sold advertising for tech publications, and then ultimately became associate publisher for a personal computing magazine. That was 10 years. Then I started my own company selling tech advertising to American companies who wanted to advertise overseas. And I built that from just myself up to 14 people, and sales from obviously nothing to 10 million a year. And then sold that to a publicly traded company. Then I began consulting, mostly with small startups, tech companies, and media companies. I did that for about 7 years. And most recently, I've moved into career coaching, startup consulting, and career consulting, coaching.
Great. Well, thank you, Barbara. How about you, John? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I moved out, actually started my career in teaching many years ago, got a degree in special ed, taught special ed for 5 years, came out to California where my teaching certificate didn't transfer, and that's when I got into the public sector, or the private sector, working for a retail chain. And then from there, I came over to the high-tech area, and started my high-tech career with Philips Semiconductors, and then Network General, and various and sundry other things until the dot-com explosion. Then I was a consultant for a while, and then got back into the private sector. So I've been doing, HR both for private companies and as a consultant for many years. Most recently, I was the head of HR at a little company called Gen Z, which is a Mahindra-owned company. And so I actually was the chief of staff for a while, as well as the head of HR. And then that's led us to where we're at now.
Great. Well, thank you, John. How about you, Michelle?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I've been in HR for many, many years. Right out of college, worked with many high-tech companies, mainly in staffing. So actually recruiting was has always been a part of what I have done since my college days. My first internship in college was recruiting Hertz drivers. So it's, that's something I've been always passionate about, finding a good employees and helping my clients now that I own my own business with the workforce plan. So spent many years in the corporate high tech world, transitioned into the pharmaceutical world, and spent 6 years at a company that was purchased by Johnson & Johnson. And about 14 years ago, I left the corporate world and actually went into a nonprofit where I became the HR person, the sole HR person of that small nonprofit, and was there for about 2 years. And then after I left that nonprofit in 2010, I started my own business. So it's been 10 years as an HR consultant, mainly to small to medium-sized companies. And I have a dual role where I'm advising my clients that are either the business owners or the founders, or I do consult with many nonprofits in the area, so the executive directors with their HR, all kinds of HR employee relations type services and questions that pop up on that side. But I've also in the last, I would say 5 years, started doing some executive coaching and really helping clients that are at the director and VP level as they transition in their roles. So it's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. How about you, Gordon?
Well, thank you, Ron, for having me, first of all, and good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon, and I've been a recruiter for a long time. 1984. Some of you out there may not have been born yet. That puts me about 101 right now. So, so I started out in working for a staffing agency, recruiting. I've done corporate recruiting. I've done contract recruiting. I've owned 2 companies, one company into staffing where I was recruiting recruiters themselves. And my second company is Hiring Frenzy, where I've done job fairs, partnered a lot with Ron, networking mixers, direct hiring, and coaching. So my background is recruiting, sales, and management. Last company I worked for was Hive Solutions in Fremont. I just finished that position in January, where I was a corporate recruiter. And I look forward to sharing with all you good folks today. Thanks.
Great. Well, you could tell we've got a very complete panel here, lots of different industries, interviewed thousands of people, so we're going to have a good conversation. Before we get started, I want to start out with a poll, and this was upon the suggestion of Gordon. I was chatting with Gordon, and we were talking about this. So here's the poll. What makes you most nervous in an interview? Is it being unprepared, the unknown, questions, behavioral questions, the technology itself, or meeting with a higher up, a manager or a director? So we'll give it a couple seconds. Give it 5 seconds more and then we'll close the poll. And if any of our panelists want to comment on this. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and I'm going to share the results. Does anyone want to comment on that? So the fear of the unknown seems to be the greatest fear. Does Jeff, any thoughts on that?
The unknown, by definition, is pretty vast, Ron. But I think it definitely speaks to, like, I think probably the panelists will agree with me. One of the things we probably all try to do when we're conducting an interview is to help sort of create a sense of what the expectations for the conversation are, and also help create kind of a sense of calm. Because it's a lot more rewarding to interview somebody who isn't wound up and afraid. So, you may find an interviewer kind of gives you kind of some guideposts of what the scope of the conversation is going to look like and what we're going to talk about and approximately how long we think it's going to take. And that can definitely help diffuse that fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's lack of control. Maybe we could have easily said lack of control, and that scares a lot of people. Any final comments from anyone before we get moving on?
Ron, I just want to tag on to what Jeff said. one thing that's important as a recruiting professional is to never forget what it's like to be a candidate. You know, the sweaty palms and the anxiety. You know, you're dressed in a manner that you're not ordinarily dressed. You're speaking to people to whom you're not familiar, and it creates a lot of anxiety. And Jeff is absolutely right. You know, when they walk in the door, say, okay, here's your itinerary, here's who you're meeting with, and just relax and let's all enjoy this. That goes a long way towards making a candidate give you their best.
So you're saying it's the burden, part of that burden is on the other end of the interviewer to make you have the candidate feel good.
Absolutely, and I think it's an indicator of the kind of company you're dealing with, or how they're going to treat you as an employee if they treat you well as a candidate.
Okay, anyone final thoughts, and then we'll move on to the other. So it's getting some comments from people, you know, yes, it is fear, it's behavior questions. Some people, the fear of the unknown is an all-encompassing thing.
I was going to say, Ron, in terms of the unknown, that what you want to do is try to make that as limited as possible for yourself as much as you can by doing as much research as you can. Look up the person who's going to interview you on LinkedIn, do your research on the company. You still are walking into somewhat of an unknown situation, but at least you can feel prepared.
So do what you can to make as best you can on that. So
Minimize the unknowns, yes.
One more question before then we'll get going into our first segment is, what stage of the interview is most stressing to you? Introductions, small talk, the information gathering part, the question and answer, the wrap-up part? What's So we'll wind down the poll in about 2 or 3 seconds. Okay, and I'm going to share the results. It seems the question and answer part is the most problematic. Any thoughts about that, Gordon?
Yes, I see question answer is 57%, most stressful, and it goes back to being prepared. I think that's the best way to handle that stress. Being prepared, meaning make sure you have some questions that you want to ask, as well as them asking you. If you don't have any questions prepared, either write them down or try to have a set of questions that you use all the time. Remember, an interview is always a two-way street. If you just sit there and let them pound you with questions, it's going to be very stressful. And as Ron just mentioned earlier, when you're interviewing, you're also interviewing them to make sure this is a company you want to work for. So have a few questions for them. If the room gets quiet, and that's when you start feeling the sweat, ask a question.
Okay. How about you, Michelle? Any thoughts about the question and answer side?
Yeah, I would echo what Gordon said. I was interviewing someone not a few weeks ago, and there's nothing more on the part of the interviewer. You've spent half an hour to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, asking the candidate questions, and when it comes to, I always leave at least 15 minutes for them to ask me questions. And there's nothing more irritating when there's nothing on the other end. So I would echo what Gordon said, come up with, anywhere from 2 to 3 questions that you want to learn about the company, about the culture, about the team you're going to be a part of, the manager that you're going to be working under. Try to get as much information as you can with the overall feel of the type of position you're going to be working with, I should say, and the role. So you should have questions around all of those aspects. And that shows the interviewer that you are interested and you're prepared and that you're excited to be part of the company.
Great. Well, those polls got people thinking. So I thought we'd dive into our first part of the workshop, and then we'll entertain your questions. Lots of questions are coming up. So the panel, what can you do? Is there a tip or two that you could provide before they get started, before they arrive at the interview? Can you think of something, Gordon? What's important in your list?
There's lots of things, but I'm gonna make it pretty basic. Show up early. Go to the parking lot. This is what I do when I'm interviewing. When I'm being the candidate, is I go to the parking lot early. A, you don't want to get lost and be late. B, sit in the parking lot, read over your notes. By what I mean by notes, the night before, you should have prepared by looking up the people you're going to be talking to, looking up their LinkedIn, kind of seeing what the background is. Maybe you went to the same college as they did, or you own a dog that they have. You want to find some commonalities. So when you get into the interview itself, you can be a little more relaxed. So definitely show up early and be prepared.
Okay, how about you, Barbara? What are some things, some first steps, even before you get to the interview, you should do?
Well, I would echo Gordon on that, on being prepared, because a lot of people are going to show up not prepared. And if you are prepared, you will have an immediate edge. And the thing about today is you can access so much information. You can know pretty much everything there is to know about that company if you take the time to learn about it. You can research employees. You can look on Glassdoor and see what people say about the company. There is so much you can do before you get there. And I would suggest that you do all of that so that you have an edge over the other applicants.
So how about you, Michelle? What are some tip or two before you get to the interview, if it's a Zoom interview or an in-person?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the technology side, having conducted recently some online interviews, just if you don't have Zoom, download the app the night before, test it out, do a test run with someone else, whether that's a friend or family member, to make sure that the app works. Same thing with your cell phone. I've had some phone interviews where cell reception, maybe because all of us are now online, I know my AT&T has gone out a couple of times because everyone's using it. So just make sure that you test your cell phone, and if you're in your home now, that all of us are in our home, it's in a place that people can hear you clearly. Again, do a little test run the night before, or even a half an hour or an hour before the call, to make sure the technology works.
How about you, Jeff? Any thoughts about prep going into the interview, what you should be doing?
I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. One slight benefit of doing this that I'll just highlight is if you're reading about a company or an organization that is doing really amazing work and you're really clicking with what you're reading, you're looking at their annual report, you're looking at their website, you're getting really excited about what you could bring, that excitement will convey in the actual interview. So beyond just actually being prepared and giving you a basis to ask really good questions, it'll also sort of affect your presentation, which is an added plus.
Okay, good point. How about you, John? Thoughts about prep?
First of all, what Gordon said, I recently in the last few months had gone to an interview and I did my research and I read their website from cover to cover, everything. And I was surprised to find that their HR manual, their policy manual was actually online. That's something that you find on the internet or intranet, but not an internet. So I read the darn thing, just to see what they were about. And lo and behold, I was asked, hey, what do you think of our policy manual? It was almost like it was a gotcha question. And I just sat back. I had made copious notes and I said, well, some of your policy questions are, addressing problems for an organization your size that you might not have. So yeah, absolutely. Prep. And ditto what Jeff said about enthusiasm. I mean, enthusiasm sells a candidate. That's how you sell yourself. So I absolutely agree with that. From an emotional standpoint, while you're sitting in there looking at your notes with Gordon, don't forget to feel good. Feel like a sense of accomplishment, because most folks, focus on, do I get a job offer? Yes, no is the brass ring, but it's not. The fact that you have an interview, you're being, yeah, it's stressful, but the fact that you have an interview in itself is a huge success. You were able to rise above a lot of other applicants that were rejected out of hand. Something that you said or did on your resume is a good selling point. It worked. So yay, walk in feeling confident because you're there for a reason. You're there because somebody said, hey, you're worth talking to. Let me see, I had a few other points here. A lot of folks have covered it. And I guess I'll just hit one more, and that is be ready with your elevator speech, because every interview I've gone to has said, hey, okay, tell us about yourself, just like we did this morning. Have your elevator speech ready to be concise. Nobody wants the Iliad. Well, I was born in the Midwest, and then I went to grade school and I got a degree in something or other. Be brief. If they have questions, they will ask. But especially folks over 40, us boomers, I'm telling you, we love to tell tales. And so, asking about yourself, keep it concise. Don't give them a novel.
Okay, all good points. And we're going to entertain some questions in a moment or two, but one more tip, if we could. What to expect once they arrive, either by Zoom or not? What are the kind of the opening moves that most recruiters or interviewers do? Do you want to clue us into that, Gordon?
Let me just clarify your question. So you're asking what recruiters are looking for when the candidate comes in?
Well, just how do they approach the beginning stages of an interview for our job seekers out there? So what's your strategy as they come in the door? What's your strategy to make them feel good? What to make them relax? What are some thoughts?
Thanks for clarifying. I usually personally, I don't like to just jump on you if you're going to come in and sit on the other side of the desk, and that just makes you even more nervous. And I know because I've been on the other side of the desk as well. I think all of us have. So personally, I try to make you as a candidate coming in feel comfortable by I will small talk with you for the first 10 seconds. I may even compliment your tie or your shoes or whatever, talk about the weather, because that gets the candidate comfortable. I want you to be comfortable so you can be yourself, so you can be at ease, so you can really share with me what I really want to know. I know there's other recruiters that may come right at you with a hard-hitting question, and that's just not me. I like to laugh low, get a little comfortable before we start. Then I'll go into my, what John mentioned. I'll go into my tell me about yourself. I'll start with that. Then I'll ask them a question or two on their resume, and just try to feel them out a little, as I know they're trying to feel me out too. So that's how I would start.
Good points. How about you, Barbara? What are some opening parts of the interview that applicants should be aware of, that you're doing what you're doing to just kind of pull them into your world?
I think every interview is different. Ideally, the person that's interviewing you is really trying to see who you are, and if they would like to sit next to you all day long when the world gets back to normal, or if they would like to work with you all day long over Zoom. So you hope that the interviewer is going to make you feel comfortable, as Gordon said. But I think as the interviewee, you kind of want to follow how that person interviewing, what their style is. They may want to be, let's get down to business and here are the questions. And I think you have to kind of try to gauge the person that's interviewing you.
So adjust to the interviewer is what you're saying. How about you, Michelle? Any thoughts about the beginning steps of an interview?
Yeah, I would echo what Barbara said as well, that you really should match with the style of the interviewer. many times, especially in the past, you'd have interviews back to back to back to back. So you want to maximize as much time as possible with the person that you're interviewing with. So if they are, right away going to get down to the questions, be prepared. If you need a minute, sometimes we need a minute to kind of like Gordon, right, asked you, can you help me clarify, right? And so that you can understand what they're asking, take the time to do that as well. If you don't understand what they're asking for, or if you just need a minute to think things through, I think it's okay to, ask for that during the interview process.
Okay, Jeff, how do you start interviews?
I was trying to come up with a good ice-breaking joke to make here, Ron, and I just am not that clever or quick this morning. I apologize, but I always try to make sure that candidates are comfortable and calm, and I always make sure that it's still a good time, that they're still going to have the time for the conversation. And occasionally I'll provide little corrective nudges. Like if I can hear a lot of background noise, I'll ask them if they need a few minutes to get to someplace quieter, and kind of, and sometimes people don't realize, and so I'd like to give little nudges like that. And then once I sort of feel like we have calm and we're focused, then I'll start.
Okay. And it's good, by the way, hearing from the perspective, this is how you are organizing your interview. How about you, John? How do you organize the beginning?
Well, as a recruiter, when the candidates would come to the front lobby, I had to take them down the hallway where our products were. And so on the way down the hallway, I would say, oh, here's our bicycle and here's how it works, and here's our scooter and here's how it works. And kind of see, kind of try and feed that enthusiasm that Jeff was talking about earlier into the candidate and get them focused on enthusiasm and being there, rather than, oh my gosh, I'm being looked at. Make them think, hey, okay, this is a company, they're doing something interesting, they have great products, and kind of break that nervousness focus. On the interviewee side, Michelle was absolutely spot on, and don't rush to answer. You don't have to answer every question right away. It's not a rapid fire kind of a thing. To say, I need a second here, or can you rephrase that, or can you clarify? That shows me that I have a candidate who's listening, who's interested, and who wants to completely understand, and doesn't just blurt things out. It also speaks to, okay, this person has some confidence. Nervous people blurt things. Nervous people are rapid fire. And as a candidate, sometimes you're going to get checklist recruiters, and that's all they do. And so someone said earlier about reading the type of interview it is. If you've got a checklist recruiter, can you do Excel? Can you do this? Can you do that? Blah blah blah. There's not going to be much interaction. Lower your expectations, because checklist recruiters, that style, that's a screening style. That's not really a get to know you style. That's just, do you have the skills kind of style. So yeah, that's it.
Well, great. These are great little tips. So we'll entertain some questions or comments right now. And this is from Mary, that she suffered discrimination at work and bullied and fired, and has had lots of effects from that. And as a result has been out of work for 2 years. How does she explain that in an interview? Does anyone want to tackle that? So how to explain 2 years, and does she dive into the specifics of the situation or not?
Well, I'll jump in here, Ron, and say that no, I would not jump into the specifics. Again, at the risk of telling stories and long-winded things, a brief answer. I took some personal time after a bad situation in my previous employer to kind of rethink things and understand, and evaluate where I wanted to go next with my career. And now I'm at the point where, I'm clear on my direction, and I know what my philosophies are, and I want to find a company that's going to be in line with those, unlike my last situation. End of story.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on that?
I think that that's always really difficult. And what John said is, that's right. And you need to kind of say it wasn't a good fit for me. And I think that that can be kind of the answer, because you don't want to come in there and start giving that kind of story right off the bat. So it's a tough situation, and you have to really kind of practice what you're going to say so that you feel comfortable about it, that you feel good about it, and you can go through that with a sense of confidence when you're being interviewed.
Gordon, you're nodding your head. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was listening to John very intently, and that was very good, because you don't want to, I've had people sit there when I asked them, and they just gave me, they talked about a half an hour about it. I don't really want to hear about that for a half an hour. It's very negative, so kind of move past that. You want to turn a negative into positive, and John did that very well. Where you just want to start saying, hey, that was in the past, and now is now, and I had some time, and it's behind me, and I'm ready to go full throttle. And you want to turn it back around, make it very positive, and get on to the next topic. We all have had negative things happen to us before in the past. You don't want to dwell on that, and you don't want the recruiter, the person interviewing you, to hear too much of that. So make it very brief, move on, and let's get this job. Keeps you in a positive note too.
Anyone else want to comment on that before we move on?
Yeah, Ron, I'll throw in one thing, and I'm very sorry for the questioner's situation. That is extremely difficult. You may find some recruiters and interviewers will drill down on things like that, and so you may initially try to kind of move on in a positive way, and you may find you get some probing follow-up questions about, well, tell me more about why you left. Tell me what was going on that you were unhappy. And if you find yourself in that situation, this is a strange answer, but I think it's important to present that you are making an effort, even if the situation was very negative and hurtful to you personally, that you are making an effort to not be bad-mouthing your prior employer. And I think a skilled interviewer will read between the lines and see, okay, something was happening to this person that was not good there. They're sort of telegraphing that to me, but they're obviously making an effort to try and present the positives, the challenges they grew from, the aspects of the situation that, and as someone who has been on both sides of that situation in an interview, it's something I appreciate as an interviewer. When I feel like a candidate, I can tell, oh yes, something happened there. I probed a little bit about it. It clearly had some kind of an effect on them, but they are making a sincere effort to frame this in a particular way for me, and I appreciate the thought they're putting into that. So.
And I'll just add a little comment too. Because the person was at the same employer for a long time, they could emphasize all the good other years that were mentioned, that this was a bad snafu during that time. So thank you all. So this is a comment from Craig. Well, I think he was commenting from previously about not being prepared, and the wrap up interviews, dance around and lie about the follow-up process. Is that true? Do any of you find that to be true? That about the follow-up, that you're vague about that?
I mean, for my part, I try to be as transparent as possible. If I am interviewing a slate of candidates and there's a lot of people we're getting through, I try to be as transparent as possible that, we're going to be spending the next several weeks interviewing, and it may be a while before they hear back. If we are dwindling down to the last, the finalists, what I call the finalists, and I try to walk them through the next steps in terms of who they're going to be interviewing with and what they're going to be looking for. And again, trying to be as transparent as long as I know, right, how soon the decision will be made. But sometimes, right now, especially right now, there's so much going on in companies and organizations. Change happens, I mean, from one day to another, right? Everything closed down. So I think one of the tips for candidates, I know it's frustrating being on the other end waiting, you have to be flexible and adaptable. The candidates that I've interviewed recently that were flexible and adaptable to our maybe shifting timelines, because I did have a client that literally from one day to another, and sometimes from the morning to the afternoon, parts of their business had to be shut down because of COVID. So again, I as transparent as possible to candidates about what's going on, and the ones that were in return adaptable and flexible were the ones that continued through the process of a recent hire that we made. So I think that's the best tip, especially right now when things are changing so rapidly for organizations.
I think it's important too to realize that companies have a plan to perhaps hire somebody in a month, and that's what they tell you. But things can shift, as Michelle said, and somebody goes on vacation, and then somebody else is too busy with a seminar to interview, and everything just gets slowed down. And that happens all the time. It's not necessarily that they're lying to you. It's really often that things are just happening that keep delaying the best intentions that the company originally had.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll just say that sometimes it's paralysis by analysis. I myself, as a candidate, I interviewed with a company and the manager said, well, this position's been open for 2 months because I haven't decided if I wanted it or not, if I actually needed the headcount or not. And then I interviewed and didn't think any more of it. And 2 months later, I got a call saying, hey, we want to make you an offer. And, you know, so a lot of it has to do, as Michelle was saying, with just internal company dynamics. It's not necessarily the recruiter that's being the delay. That, you know, it's been my experience. I always try and be as transparent as possible. But there are so many things outside of my control, you know, at pay grades above mine. The one thing that I won't do is I won't give much in terms of interview feedback. In this litigious society, after all my years, I've become really gun shy about when people call me up and say, hey, you know, I didn't get the job. What could I have done better? You know, I'll find some euphemistic tap dance because, you know, the last thing I want to do is to give somebody a stick to beat me with. And it's a, you know, I used to, in my younger days, you know, I used to do that a lot because I felt it was important. But, you know, that's, the society has changed and I don't feel comfortable doing that any longer.
Okay. So here's a question from Ivana. She's been on disability and COVID for a year. Which is the best way to manage cover letter and questions when applying for a job? Should I address as a disability or in particular diabetes? So how does she answer that going into the interview? Anyone?
I think right now with COVID, I think everyone's resume is going to have a big gap. So even us recruiters, we're all going to see that you haven't worked for 3 months, 6 months, a year, or whatever. I would stay away somewhat of the personal issues unless you were asked. Then you can just tell them, you know, it was illness or whatever. But everyone's going to have a gap. So I think everyone looking for a job right now has a little bit of advantage. If you have a gap even longer than the beginning of the year, you know, you can kind of play it off a little bit. We're not going to expect you to speculate as much as prior when there was not COVID or the pandemic going on. So you can kind of play around with that, and once again, just try to move forward and keep it positive.
Okay, so this question, we'll delay this. It's more about salary. So the interview is, let's say the interviewer is totally prepared, as HR hasn't prepped them on how to interview. How aggressive should you be in controlling the interview? If you find someone on the other side is not doing their job, what do you do? How do you handle that in a finesse way?
Well, you should never control the interview because the interviewer is the person who's supposed to be in control. And that can actually lose you the job because they'll feel that you are overstepping the boundaries that are kind of set up for an interview. But what you can do is give the information to the person that you feel will help you get the job. So try to talk longer and give more specific examples. And when you give your answers, try to get as much out of them as you can.
Okay. Now, this is kind of a version of being disoriented on the part of the interviewer. This is from Larry, that very discombobulated interview, constant interruptions. The interview had to excuse himself twice. Do you think it's best to ask for a setup to test? Is it done on purpose for stress, or what do you recommend when you find that it's a totally disoriented interview?
Well, to me, that sends a message right there about the organization that you're working for. You know, the interview is the tip of the iceberg. And if they can't do an interview right, I question the rest of their business processes because it's the most important to me. You know, interviewing is selling. You know, you've got to paint a good picture. You've got to get candidates enthusiastic because you know, nobody wants to go to their first day of work like they're going to prison. And so you have to paint a good picture. And if you're not doing that, if you as a candidate are not experiencing that, then that's a red flag right there.
Okay. Anyone else?
Ron? Yeah, to part of the question the questioner was asking, I think I can safely say, and I think the panel would agree, an interviewer is almost never deliberately trying to stress you out or deliberately trying to entrap you in some way. We certainly have all heard stories of scenarios where that happens, but in general, broadly, most of the time, an interviewer is maybe just encountering some legitimately complicated circumstance in their own situation. They're not trying to stress you out or see how you perform under pressure or something like that. There are too many variables in that. You don't want that lack of control in the interviewing environment. So that's probably not what's going on.
Okay, this is a question from Tricia, and we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. The old weakness question. Could you talk about your strengths and weaknesses? And we'll actually entertain this. Another question. Getting feedback when the candidate, without feedback, without any feedback, candidates can do multiple interviews over an extended period of time, not knowing that they're possibly doing something wrong. So how do you get information to know that you're on the right track? So without information that they're on the right track, so how can you get information about your interview style?
Are you talking about multiple interviews in the same company or multiple interviews over multiple companies?
Well, I think the person's just asking in general if they're doing the right thing or giving the wrong answer. How could they come together that they're, you know, assembling a good case for themselves? Does that make sense, Michelle?
Yeah, and this is, I guess, a plug for one of your offerings, which is mock interviews. You know, because very similar to John, I too am hesitant to share feedback with candidates, very specific feedback. So I think practicing interviewing ahead of time is a good idea. And I know, Ron, you have an offer, you've offered in the past mock interviews. And getting other people to interview you and practicing and getting, because in that kind of a setting, you know, asking for feedback is expected, right, as part of the process. So that might be a way to see if you feel that what you're doing in an interview is not really working, is asking someone, you know, family member, friend, Ron, when he has an offering of a mock interviews, just partaking in that and seeing if you can't get feedback through those avenues.
And it was qualified or clarified that multiple companies, so evidently something going on and on. How about you, Barbara? Any thoughts about that?
I agree that you can end up doing something in an interview that potentially isn't the best thing for you and not even realize it. So if you keep getting cut off after the first phone interview, or you keep getting cut off after the second interview, there's probably areas that you can improve on. And really, I think what Michelle said, doing a mock interview with somebody who's a professional who can give you a sense of where you can improve can make a huge difference, because there's so many variables. It might be how you're answering a question about why you haven't worked for a year. It might be just a lack of enthusiasm, because truthfully, you don't even really want that job. So trying to figure that out and have a sense of that, you need somebody who can listen to you and give you feedback, and things like the mock interviews are really, really helpful for people.
So you're right. It's a gentle way of getting feedback. Here's a poll question. We'll get into some typical questions, and I want you to answer, give your comments on this, Gordon, and see what the results are. What question gives you the most difficult time during the interview? Tell me about yourself. Tricia mentioned, what is your greatest weakness? What are your salary expectations? How do you handle a difficult situation, a behavioral question? Or tell me a time when you feel cold. So take a few seconds for that and we'll close. So I want you to start the comment, Gordon, and then I'll follow up with you, Jeff. So I'm going to close it in about 5 seconds. Okay. You know, it's the greatest. What's your greatest weakness? Oh, pardon me. Tell me about a time when you did not achieve your goals. Do you want to respond?
Sure. First of all these are great questions, and I think this is really good. If you're listening right now, you should write down all these questions, because you should have answers to all these questions before you go into the interview. Tell me about yourself, greatest weakness, salary expectations, difficult situation, and the time you did not achieve your goals. So have an answer for each one of these. And I think the panel was correct that you should be able to not just answer these, but have a good answer. It doesn't have to be very long. So the one that seems to be really high right here on this list is, tell me a time when you did not achieve your goals and your greatest weakness. I'm going to start with your greatest weakness, because a lot of people ask me that question all the time. How I answer that question personally, I always start with these 3 words. And if you want to write this down, you're more than welcome to. I always start with, I get frustrated. I'll say that again. I get frustrated. And I'll answer the rest of that. I get frustrated when people are lazy. You know, what is that? What am I telling the interviewer or the recruiter? I'm telling him or her that I get frustrated when people are lazy, because I'm not lazy. I get frustrated when people are not fair, because I'm a very fair person. So you're turning a negative into a positive. That's what you want to do when you're interviewing for a job. You also want to turn a negative into a positive. Tell me about a time when you did not achieve your goals. Now, this is one that you might have to think about. You probably don't want to find a goal you didn't achieve where you got fired or terminated. Make it something kind of light. Maybe you didn't achieve your goals because when you first saw the job, they wanted you to know how to use pivot charts, for example. And you can say, yeah, I didn't achieve my goals because when I started, my manager wanted me to do this on pivot charts, but I don't know how to do pivot charts. So what I did was I went home and I learned how to do it. I asked a friend, I asked a couple of people, I learned how to do it. And a week later, I was the top pivot chart person in the group or whatever. So once again, you're turning a negative in the positive. You always want to leave it at a positive. So know these questions, have answers in situations that how you handle them, and then make sure you convey that message when you're answering the questions.
So any thoughts about that, Jeff? Want to build on any
Yeah.
of these 5 questions?
Yeah, Gordon laid a really great foundation about how to approach these. I will say interviewers are definitely on guard, particularly around kind of greatest weakness questions, for answers that seem a little too perfect in terms of turning something into a positive. There are HR memes that float around about the candidates who say their greatest weakness is they work too much or work too hard. You know, you want to avoid that as well. Like, I think, like when I ask this question, what I'm really trying to assess is like, how self-aware is this person? Like, is there something that is a challenge for them? And what have they done or are they doing to be working toward correcting or compensating for that? Like, that's, you want to be positive, but you also want to show like, yeah, there's this aspect of my work or something that I know I could be better at, and here's what I'm doing to be better. You know, that's, otherwise it's actually not unusual if you give an answer that might seem a little too rehearsed. Somebody might follow up with, well, what is your second greatest weakness? You know, I've definitely seen that happen. So that's just a caution there.
So
And then same thing with the goal. Same thing with the goals question. You want to show like that you actually identified something that wasn't perfect or could have been improved, or you've acknowledged about yourself that you want to change. And then you want to show in your answer what steps you've taken or are taking to deal with that.
Okay, how about you, John? What are some of your thoughts about some of these questions?
Well, the greatest weakness question is one where I find that, being genuine, being realistic. In my own personal situation, I'm a visual person. I'm a person of letters. I've got great language skills, but I can't do math in my head to save my life. And I tell people that. I said, if you want to hire a mathematician, I'm not your guy. Because God forbid I get put in a position where I'm required to do math in my head all the time. If we're sitting in a meeting and somebody says, oh, what percentage is this and that? I got to sit down there with a calculator or a spreadsheet. And so I just, that's realistic. I tell the truth and show them, okay, this is genuinely me. This is genuinely, one thing I can't do. Another take is, I talk about on the spectrum of strategic to tactical. I'm kind of right of center on the tactical side. If you want somebody who's a master planner, not me. And being genuine about who you are and what you can do, I think, moves toward that. The question about a difficult situation, I think, is an unfair question. And if someone were to ask me that question, I would say, well, what kind of a difficult situation are we talking about? A budget situation? Are we talking about a human resources situation? And get some clarification, because that's such a broad umbrella. So yeah, get some specifics on that one. But that's about all I can come up with right now.
Okay, how about you, Michelle? Any thoughts about those questions?
Yeah, so one tip on both tell me how you handle a difficult situation and not achieving a goal. When I've asked questions that are similar to that, what I'm trying to understand is, what did the candidate learn from those situations where things didn't go well? Because, most jobs you will come across, hopefully not right away, but life happens, right? And again, there's a lot of change going on in organizations right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I want to know that if a applicant that we hire comes across situations that are uncomfortable and difficult, that they're going to be resourceful. They're going to have initiative to find a way out of those situations, right? And to reach out into their team members when they are in a pickle, right? So my big thing is understanding, okay, have you been in uncomfortable situations? We all have. and what did you learn from it, and what resources did you use to get out of it? I think that's really key to convey to that interviewer.
Okay. How about you, Barbara? Any thoughts about any of those questions?
Yeah, I would echo the panel, and I would say that those two questions we've been discussing are about awareness and resilience. When things don't go your way, do you bounce back quickly? That's what they're trying to find out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's a question from Craig about salary. The recent laws in California, they can't look at what you've previously made. Any comments about salary expectations? That's not an illegal question, right? It's the fact that you're pinning them down to what they made, but the question itself isn't illegal. Any comments, Jeff? Do you have anything to say on that?
Let's see. Yeah, it's a tricky space because there's also some best practices that hopefully the interviewer or the company, ideally you have responded and applied to a role where the interviewer has been upfront about the salary range for the position. If they've not, if you've gone through a couple of rounds of interviews and you are being considered as a serious candidate, they should be disclosing to you the range for the position if you ask.
Okay.
So,
any other comments about salary? Gordon, do you have any thoughts?
I agree with Jeff. Yeah, first of all, we cannot ask you anymore what you made or your salary for your last position or any of the positions. So best way that I would handle this is to try to keep it open. Try not to disclose a number if you don't have to. You can go too high. Let's say I'm interviewing 3 candidates. You're candidate number 2. You can go too high, way high, and you'll be out. You can go too low, and you can lowball yourself. Try to do a little research before you go into the interview. Find out approximately this type of position at this level, what does it pay? You can find things on Glassdoor, Google. You can find out some salary information. If you can't, try to come in and once again, if you have to answer it, because sometimes they ask you for a number, give them a range if you can. I'm looking for 60 to 80,000. Give them a range. Try not to once again pinpoint yourself to an actual number. And like what Jeff said, ask the question back. What's the range for this job? I've had people asking that, and I had to tell them kind of the range. Or I'm sure you guys are a great company. Whatever the market values for this position is fine with me. So once again, you want to answer the question by being open. Try not to give a specific number. Don't go too low, too high. Do some research, and you should be fine.
Okay, any final thoughts on that? Well, here's a question or a comment. Janine just had an interview yesterday. She felt the interview went fairly well. I was honest about lack of particular experience. Well, I would never lie. Is an interviewer likely to appreciate the honesty over the experience and feel the experience can be learned? So at what point are you revealing more than you should? Any thoughts?
I would say.
Go ahead.
John and then Barbara.
Okay. At no point should you tear yourself down. Obviously, you're there for a reason. They saw something on your resume or cover letter that said, we want to talk to this person. So, if you have internal doubts, keep them to yourself. If they have questions, they can answer you, but I wouldn't ever, deliberately tear yourself down or say, geez, it would be great to have it, but I don't know if I can do it. That's self-defeating.
Okay, Barbara?
As John said, you don't ever want to give them a reason not to hire you. If they ask you, do you have experience in this, and you don't, you can say no, but I'm a very fast learner, and in my last job, I had no experience with the program they were using it, and I learned it very quickly. I don't anticipate that being a problem at all. A lot of times it's going to be your confidence and the way you appear when you answer that question. If you seem really hesitant, ooh, I don't know, I don't have that experience, that's not going to work for you.
Okay, any final thoughts? Okay, this is from Barry. He has a disability. Some job counselors have told him to hide the disabled parts unless on a video interview. How does he handle a disability? How is that managed in an interview? Jeff, I'm going to start with you on that.
Yeah, that's a great and tricky question, Ron, and a lot of it depends on what kind of potential modifications that disability might mean for the position being interviewed for. So it's hard to answer it broadly other than use that interview as a chance to maybe explore that question a little bit internally, like what you feel you may need to have be different or changed about the role as you're learning more about it in order to accommodate whatever those particular needs may be. Employers are absolutely open to reasonable accommodations for the positions based on the need. So I would say it's a tricky question. It will depend on the role, and it will depend on what you may need to have as an accommodation for the role. And that's all I should probably say without knowing more.
Anyone else want to handle that? Okay. After a termination, I learned that HR contacted a prior manager who they worked with for 16 years to tell that she wasn't permitted as a reference for me due to severance agreement. Consequently, the strongest reference is not willing to be a reference. As a result, I have references from a job I had, so an older reference. The place I worked for 6 years prior has purged its personnel file, so no record of having worked there. So what do you do when your most recent experience isn't your best speaking voice for you? Any thoughts?
You're just going to have to go out farther. I mean, most of us have a number of people who have worked with us, and you might have to search a couple layers deeper to find some people who have worked with you who will speak highly of you and use different references.
Okay, and that's not going to come out in the interview, correct?
To something actually John touched on earlier, we live in such a litigious society, and I have certainly worked for employers who would really punish employees if they found out people had given references outside of the official channels, and the official channels were, we will confirm the dates you worked, and we will confirm that you worked here and what you were being paid, and that's it. So interviewers are probably somewhat aware that some employers are very reticent to give references at all, and will be somewhat prepared for that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a big deal, particularly if you have strong references from a role previous to that, or from a community organization you volunteer with, or some other strong references you can present.
Okay, anyone else about references?
Yeah, I have to agree that most of us will try to get a reference from your last company you worked at, but if that's not the strongest one, for what Barbara and Jeff said as well, is you should have a handful of good references of some company you work for. I'm sure someone's going to say something good. And these days, Jeff just said it, a lot of us won't give references. I want to verify the dates you were there, maybe your title, maybe your salary, but we don't go too much further into that, good or bad. So you should be okay. And sometimes we even ask for some personal references. I'm sure you can find someone that's going to say something good about you. So make sure you have those lists of references ready. Make sure you trust these people. Make sure you tell them that someone might be calling you, so they're kind of aware and not caught off guard. Those are some of the things you can do to help your own cause.
Okay, any other thoughts?
In line with what Gordon was saying, a cautionary tale, make sure that the people that are on your reference list are going to say good things about you. You know, it was a once in a career thing, but I called one reference and this guy said things about the candidate that were it could have been legally actionable. I don't know, the guy must have lost his mind, and I don't know, why he would do that. But always make sure that you don't surprise your references to say, let them know, hey, I just talked to Joe Bag of Donuts over at XYZ Corporation, and they may be giving you a call because you're on my list. Just again, a cautionary tale.
Okay. So this is about resilience. This person's worked full-time while she was getting chemo and radiation for cancer. I think that shows resilience, but I understand that bringing it up, health issues, is a taboo. I would like some unconscious biases on the interviewer's part might work against me. Do you agree? So I think it's kind of two ends of the coin showing resilience, but how much does she reveal? Anyone?
I'd say little, if any,
Yeah.
other than saying, you can count on me. I'm the kind of person where, all the things you got to worry about, I'm not one of them. And I've had several situations in my past where the company, I was in a bit of rough water, but the company never knew. I got the job done, and leave it at that. And if they want to ask questions, they can do that. But I wouldn't share more than you need to.
Anyone else? Okay. Is it so difficult just to get an interview? I've sent dozens of resumes in the last 3 months. Do you suggest adding in your cover letter to stand out from the rest to be considered in the interview? So I guess it's a question of how to be a little bit more competitive in their presentation. Barbara, any thoughts?
Could you repeat that, Ron? I'm sorry.
Well, it hasn't been getting too many interviews and was suggesting doing cover letters as adding a little more value to being competitive. So I guess it's a question of how to get an interview.
Your resume is really important, and you might want to have a professional look at it just to make sure that it's on track to get that first call. And every resume needs to reflect the job that you're looking for. You do need to personalize it, use that company's language, and try to really reflect what they're asking for as much as you can within your own experience. In regards to cover letters, they're not as long as they used to be. If somebody asks for a cover letter, you should definitely give one, but not all companies are requesting them at this point in time.
So any thoughts from Gordon, how to stand out? Really, it's how do I get in an interview? How do I get seen by recruiters?
Well, your question is a question that's asked a lot. I mean, everyone's asking all the time. I've sent so many resumes out. I'm not getting any interviews. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my resume? Barbara did say, that was really good, that you need to kind of tweak your resume and talk their language a little bit if you can. Don't use the same resume for every company. It's more work, but you're going to have to do it. So think about it this way. You sent your resume in. So did 100 other people for that same position. So you're thinking, so as a recruiter, I have 100 resumes I'm looking at for this one position. How does your resume stand out? You probably have to do something a little different besides tailoring a little bit, talking their verbiage. A cover letter could or could not help. As recruiters, we get so busy working on so many jobs. At least I'll speak about myself. I don't have time to read all the cover letters coming in. That's just too much. I'm zeroing in, I'm looking in. I'm probably looking at your last job. If I'm McDonald's and your last job is Burger King, you're probably gonna get a little more of a look than if you worked at some high-tech company because you work for a direct competitor. And I'm interested in someone who can flip burgers, and you've done that before. So that's gonna be your best bet. It's kind of a numbers game, unfortunately. You can be sending out tons of resumes right now. Try not to feel defeated, even though I know you're going to be, because I would be as well. There's just so much competition out there. So many people have lost their jobs. There's so many more resumes going in for that one opportunity you're looking for. There's resumes that aren't even close. People are just sending them. So as a recruiter, I have to weed out resumes really fast. I probably take 5 seconds to look at a resume. And if it has nothing to do with it, you're going in a no pile pretty fast. And if you're, once again, if I'm McDonald's, you're Burger King, you're probably going to go in the yes or maybe pile. So you want to just get in that yes or maybe pile. Take small steps. Don't think a resume is going to get you a job. It only gets you a phone interview or a Zoom call, so take small steps and try to approach it that way. I think that will ease your mind. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We all have one company we're dying to work for, and you think my resume is going to fit. It may not, because we're getting a lot of other resumes as well. So do your best and kind of forget the rest.
Okay.
I have to wholeheartedly agree with Gordon about using the right resume for the right company. It's got to reflect a background that the job description asks for. It's all about the skills. And, certainly a little bit of cinnamon on top is if you've been keeping your skills current, even if it's something that you're not doing right now, if you've, taken a class or done volunteer work that includes those skills. Yeah, but skills are what get you in the door. Gordon is basically, I'm reading out of his playbook and he's reading out of mine there. You only have a few seconds with all these resumes people are applying that aren't even close to being qualified. So you've got to take the step up and say, hey, here's my resume that shows what you asked for is what I got.
Okay. Here's a question, a technical question about, how do you view the use of virtual backgrounds in video interviews? Does anyone have experience that they want to share? So how do you view the use of virtual backgrounds in video interviews?
I think as long as Ron, because I've had to do a couple of them recently, so it's fresh in my mind, as long as they're not distracting, right? You want them to be, at the end of the day, the interviewer wants to see your face and your facial expressions, especially since we can't be in person. So if the virtual background is distracting, right? Sometimes like half the person's hair is gone, or you only see like the forehead, So again, this is where you want to practice ahead of time, have someone in your family or friends, or better yet, if you know of a recruiter or someone in HR in your network, have them practice with you and show them various backgrounds and, see which one is going to be the least distracting, because at the end of the day, I want to see the person and the person's facial expressions.
Okay.
And I want to hear them. I want to be able to hear them. That's the other piece too.
So here's a question from Nanette. A recruiter she spoke with asked for date of birth. Why is this? Jeff, do you want to answer that?
Could you repeat the question, Ron? That sounds odd.
A recruiter called her today and asked for her date of birth.
That's kind of a red flag, actually,
Yeah,
Ron.
that's a red flag.
Yeah, that's a red flag. That's not a question that a recruiter should be asking you or a company should be asking you. It is beyond the pale of legal questions.
So how would you handle that? If you
I would work with a different recruiter on a different opportunity. I guess it's a real that's a sign that somebody really doesn't know their kind of basic legal responsibilities.
Or
to be honest, or don't care. Yeah. And there certainly are situations where people don't care, and if it's a situation where people don't care, it's not something you want to be involved in.
Okay. So this is from Ivana. She's worked for the same company for 25 years. Who should she put down as a reference?
Supervisors and peers would be my recommendation. If she has subordinates, throw a couple of them in there too, but make very clear on her resume sheet or on her reference sheet who's a supervisor, who's a peer, and who's a subordinate.
Okay.
And People who will speak highly of you, because you usually do have a sense when you work within a company, particularly that long, who will speak highly of you and who won't. And you definitely want the one who will speak positively about you.
So here's a question from the net. Someone, employer wanted a copy of her degree. Why is that?
A reason why that could be, for example, at Life Moves, we employ a lot of psychologists and social workers, and we do education verifications. And currently, with so many schools being closed, the services we use to do education verifications are running incredibly slowly or sometimes not able to produce the information we need. So it can be faster to ask candidates to present the information directly. You know, with some schools, we're seeing like 4 and 6 week waits to get confirmations of degrees. And so if a candidate is able to present it up front, it makes the process move faster. That could be a reason.
I read somewhere that that's one of the areas of the biggest fudge factor is not telling the truth about education or a degree. And education's going to want that because that's their world. This is from Anita. Since we're interviewing the interviewer, what are some red flags to watch for? Any verbal cues, mannerisms, attitudes that would cue you in as an interviewee? That's a good question. So how do you pay attention to where taking in the environment? And by the way, isn't it more difficult because we're in a Zoom world? How do we get to know the environment that we're going to be walking into?
I think you're going to have to ask the interviewer. As a candidate, you're going to have to, hopefully you've done some research, you know how long they work there. You know, you can ask them anything like, how do you like working here? What's the culture here? And listen for their answer. What they're going to say is important because you're trying to find out, once again, if you want to work there yourself. If they've been there 2 months, the person before them was there for a month, the person before them were there for a week, and you can ask these questions. You know, they're going to tell you. That's a little bit of a red flag of why people are leaving. The interviewer is going to give you some negative answer about the company. If you start asking, telling about the company growth, and they tell you, well, this company's okay. You know, if they're not real positive, then that's a red flag. You know, you have to make sure, and they could be, interviewer or the recruiter could be desperate to hire someone too. So you kind of have to watch out on the other side. They may hire any warm body that comes through the door, you know, because they're having a lot of pressure to hire someone. And you may be that next warm body coming through the door. So you have to kind of be a little keen, a little bit aware that if you get the job too easy, is this somewhere I really want to work for?
Any other thoughts from anyone?
I would say just how are they treating you? How have they communicated with you? Certainly a benchmark of if they're interested or not is I get a call from a recruiter, you know, a checklist recruiter, and boom, boom, boom. And then 3 days later, I get another call. Hey, you know, are you available, and so forth. If they have a high degree of interest, that's how they treat you, and you know, that's always a good sign. But if you, as a candidate, just feel like they're treating you, you know, respectfully and courteously, that's a good sign. If they ghost you or in any way, you know, let you lapse for long periods of time without communicating, that sends a message too. You know, what's important? Are you important?
Okay, good point. So we have lots of questions here, and I'm just going to put a hold on any future questions because we'll get through these and those that want to respond. How do you get through ATS? Anyone want to handle that? You're laughing, Jeff, so we'll let you answer that.
It's the question of the modern age, and I guess I'll answer this 2 ways. One of them is you want to connect with people whose advice you trust, and with, if you can, get access to some workshops or some HR professionals and really craft an excellent resume, and be sure that you have tailored that resume to the specific company and position you're applying for. That is your best offense. But it's also incredibly important to remember I do a fun little game on LinkedIn. I have occasionally applied to a role because I thought the posting was written in a really unusual way, and then been able to track how many other applicants there were for a position sometimes. And I will see roles, interesting roles getting, 1,100, 1,200 applicants just through their LinkedIn channel. And I think the key thing is to cast a very wide net, be looking for a lot of different things and not get overly attached to any one application or role that you are applying for, because the market is getting, obviously with the unemployment situation, extremely competitive, and ATSs are just getting clogged. And obviously go in with the best materials you can, but then have a good sense of humor about moving on to the next thing if you don't get a response.
Okay. So this is a question more about LinkedIn. What's the biggest mistake you see in with applicants regarding LinkedIn pages? Any thoughts?
I have a couple tips on LinkedIn. One is it shouldn't just be, there's a method to the madness in terms of what you put in from the history part on LinkedIn. You don't want to just rattle off all your job duties that you did, the last however many years in the various companies you worked at. You also want to show results. And again, you want to come across very clearly on, this is what I have to offer you, employer, right? I pay attention. I stay on LinkedIn profiles that catch my attention when I'm seeing more result-oriented verbiage, right? Content. Another key thing is keywords. Having keywords both on LinkedIn as well as on your resume, going back to the last question about how to get through those systems. Keywords, right? You want to tailor it and use the language that the job ad, right, is using to describe what your skills and experience look like. So having keywords is really important. I've gone to a couple LinkedIn profiles or LinkedIn workshops on the back end, for recruiters, and the algorithms are such that, as Gordon was saying, you type in your keywords and that's what pops up. So you want to make sure those keywords are embedded in your LinkedIn profile. And then the summary section is really critical and important, using that wisely, again, to not just regurgitate everything you've done over the last 20 years, but what have you done recently that, again, is results oriented and makes you stand out and is going to help an employer save money, time, energy. How can you, showing your creativity and innovation in that summary is really key.
Okay, so here's we'll finish these questions and then we'll wind up. This is it advisable to reveal an inability to give oral presentations to groups? This is actually an ADA issue, so the job requires it. So do I have to disclose at some point in the interview or the offer or accepting? So I'll make that into a general question. What is it if you don't have all the qualifications being stated? At what point do you discuss that? Gordon, do you want to?
Well, I think you have to be honest and you have to discuss it up front, because that's one of the main qualifications, especially if that's the first bullet point that you have to do presentations. If you can't do it, I think you have to tell them that, if you can somehow say, maybe you're not that's not one of your strengths, but you could learn it. You could get better at it if you can. If it's something you completely cannot do, you probably want to be upfront and tell them that's not something I can do. You might want to find another position in that company. If you're already talking to the recruiter, you might be able to find something that you can do. But you do need to be upfront, because you don't want to be hired and get fired on the same day. So.
Okay, so this is a question. I'll address it to you, Barbara. The person has a disability that prevents them to returning to a previous career of 30 years, lots of transferable skills, but how do you transition to a new career without specific experience in the field when HR is not open to a person like themselves. So
If you know what you want to do, then you can start to look for a bridge to get you over there, because you probably have many terrific skills after 30 years. So it's looking at those skills, figuring out what you want to do, and then often you can do kind of a bridge job that can be perhaps a volunteer position that starts to get you involved in the new career that you want to be part of. That usually is an option. If you can't have, if you have anything where you can have pieces of your old career and pieces of the new career, which is also kind of a bridge, that's another option.
okay,
You
I'm
have
going
to
to
be
just,
really open to new ways.
John, I'm going to ask this of you. This is from Nanette. She's getting lots of recruiters from India. Are they valid recruiters? They're contacting her through LinkedIn. Have you had experience in that?
Well, I guess it depends on the industry. Certainly, you know, the time that I spent in an IT consulting role or for an IT consulting company, yeah, that's it's legitimate. If they're contacting you about a legitimate position, you know, there are certainly enough scammers out there saying, hey, you know, we saw your resume and we think you're a perfect fit for this and that. But if they can't reference you to a specific company and say, hey, you know, we've got this so you can verify that it's a real position, then that's a problem. But, you know, I spent 13 years working for Mahindra, and the majority of our recruiting was offshore recruiters, just to save money on, you know, on labor costs. So just because somebody is from India doesn't mean that, you know, it's illegitimate, far from it. But again, you know, the legitimacy of the position. Is it one where, you know, somebody's not trying to, you know, scam money off of you. Instead, they are legitimately contacting you and can reference the company and reference the position and all the details. You know, the scams, I even get them, you know, people offering me positions for an unnamed company. It's weird. You know, it's just not to be trusted. But yeah, if they can give you the details, then absolutely yes.
Okay, so I'm going to address this to you, Gordon. What's the ideal length for an elevator pitch?
Short. Short. Why I say short is they wouldn't. That should be the easiest question to answer, because you have to know about yourself. You know yourself better than I know you. I know myself better than you know me. So be short, but have it ready. You don't want to. I think it was John that said it earlier. You don't want to tell them where you were born and all that. We don't care about that. You want to tell them why you would be good for this job. So tailor your elevator pitch. Practice it the night before. When I say short, couple sentences, you know, I have the experience. I've done this in the past. I think I can really bring a lot to this company, and just tell them why. Couple minutes.
Okay, so here's a final question from Jose. His last interviews have been very encouraging. One of them hinted at wanting to hire him, but interviews were at least 1 hour long, then no more contact. I'm in IT. What gives? Is this typical? That brings up a question. Does the length of time really mean anything? Is that a good sign or a bad sign, or just a neutral sign? Jeff, do you want to?
It's a neutral sign. It could be great. It could be, you know, yes, probably if the interview is going badly, the interviewer will try to wrap it up sooner. So in that sense, it's a good sign. But some people just have a naturally shorter interview style. Some people allow more time and have longer interviews. I've noticed, Ron, a theme to a lot of these questions is the what gives on the end of it. And I think to that, something I would say, because it's certainly something I'm experiencing with the roles that we're posting, is just dramatic spikes in application volumes. And a lot of channels make it very easy to apply. And so I'm also seeing large numbers of candidates who are not well qualified for the roles. And so I'm having to spend a lot of time going through those resumes. So the time I'm spending with any one resume is getting shorter. And so again, I think the encouragement I've given before, like, it is unfortunately about putting yourself out there a lot and being open to lots of different kinds of roles and applying for lots of different roles, and not getting, if a process is going slowly or you're not getting responses, having something to pivot your attention to toward another application, another possibility is really vital, because a lot of processes are just going to go very slowly. And a lot of, even a lot of places that used to be, I will just say, despite our best efforts, even at Life Moves, we've slowed way down since COVID. It's incredibly hard to get all of the decision makers in the right place to do their Zooms, to share their feedback with one another. Our process has just slowed way down, and I try to let candidates know that, but sometimes even I'm chagrined, you know, so people just have to be resilient in that way, for sure.
Okay. Well, I thought everyone's been very generous with their time, so I thought we'd wind up, but I wanted to do one final poll. How do you typically end an interview? Restate your interest in the position, find out next steps, get their card and for thank yous, summarize why you're the right person, or the simple hope and pray? So we'll wind down in a couple of seconds here. I'm going to close it in 3 seconds. Okay. So it seems like the most problematic or most interested were finding out the next steps. Any thoughts about that, Michelle? Any tips?
No, I think it's always good to ask for next steps, you know, and especially as Jeff mentioned and I mentioned too, right? Right now, there's just a lot going on in most organizations. So when the interview says it might take a couple weeks, no, it might take a couple weeks, but what you can do is find out when you can ask them, is it okay if I call you in a week or 2 weeks, right? That's an okay question to ask. And if the interview is open to it, then, you know, make sure you put it on your calendar and you reach out via email, or I like email personally because phone calls, it's sometimes harder to get to. So you can always ask if you can reach out to a person by a specific date and how they prefer to be contacted. That's a good tip. And then the other piece around thank you notes, that's something that even nowadays, I rarely get personal thank you emails or notes. So when I see that come through, you know, especially if it's a candidate that I like as a recruiter, that just really makes you stand out, because that's something that doesn't happen. As much as I encourage people to send thank you notes, that's rarely something that happens these days. So always good to send some kind of thank you, whether it's an email or an actual physical card.
You know, by the way, I saw a survey about that very thought about thank you notes. Most employers want them and they don't get them. So there's a big gap between what they want and what they get. Any thoughts, final thoughts about that follow-up, Barbara?
I would do all of these things.
So praying would be big, huh?
Well, I would hope, I would pray, and I would also try to reconnect, as Michelle just said. But I think wrapping up an interview and saying, you know, I'm really interested in this company. I think that I can do a lot for you, be based on my past experience. What are your next, you know, what's the next step? Because I think doing all of these things are great.
And well, I want to thank everyone. You've been very generous with your time. Gordon, is there something, final thoughts? Did we miss something that we didn't cover?
No, we said a lot. And I just want to reiterate what I think the key point should be. If you have the interview, you're ahead of the 100 people that applied, if you're one of the very few, be prepared. Must be prepared. Got to be prepared. Be positive. You know, like I said, be prepared, be positive, rehearse, practice. You have to have all those things. I want to make a comment on closing interview. What you don't want to do when you close an interview, I'm going to answer that by saying is you don't want to say nothing. I've had people at the very end of the interview when I ask them, do you have any more questions? You'll be surprised how many people tell me, nope, I'm done. You know, that shows lack of interest. This is your time to shine. This is when you want to do all those points that was listed on that bulletin, on that screen just a couple of seconds ago. Reiterate your interest, send a thank you card. A lot of people forget to ask for a business card. I don't know why that's so hard, but you have to ask for a business card. How are you going to thank them? You need their address, you need the email. Hope and pray is always good, 9%. I will give that 10%. But do all those things above and make sure you do ask for the steps of the interview. Really, really important to know what the next step is, because then you're going to know if you're in the group of the next step or if you didn't make the cut. You know, also really important to besides ask what the next steps are, ask if I can contact you. I think Michelle or Barbara said that. Really also really important, but be prepared. Got to be prepared.
So, well, I'll take one final question. I'll give this to you, John. What has been the best question an interviewer can have asked, in your opinion?
The best question that as an interviewer, someone has asked me,
Yes.
they've asked me about the business and said, okay, where does your revenue come from? Because that's showing me that you know, they've read about my company, but they've also read about the industry, and they kind of have an idea of how things work. It shows that they're looking beyond just, okay, you know, I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut code and then I'm going to go home. It shows that they're taking a bigger picture look at the organization, and it shows a curiosity and an interest in what we're doing and our mission and our industry.
Okay. Well, this panel's been terrific. We've had a lot of good questions and we've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate your perspective. Thank you, Jeff, Barbara, John, Michelle, and Gordon.